When you've known someone since you were 10, you think you know everything about them. My name is Anna, I'm 39 years old, and I've been a high school literature teacher for over a decade. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a cozy old house with creaky stairs and a garden I love more than most people. I met Lara when we were both in elementary school. She was the loud, wild one with tangled red hair and scraped knees. I was the shy kid who always had her nose in a book. Somehow we just fit. Lara was more than my best friend. She was like a sister. Over the years, she was there for everything. My college breakup, the time I got pneumonia. When I landed my first teaching job, she brought champagne to my doorstep. She stood next to me at my wedding 12 years ago, holding my bouquet with trembling hands because she was crying more than I was. And when her parents died, I sat with her through every silent hour of grief. Our lives were interwoven, tangled together like the roots of two trees growing side by side. My husband Daniel met her not long after we started dating. I remember the first time I introduced them. Lara had grilled him with 1,000 questions, trying to protect me, but he passed her test. At least that's what I thought back then. The three of us grew close in those early years. Dinner parties, birthday trips, even lazy Sundays in our backyard. It was normal for her to stop by unannounced. She had a key to our house, she always had. Looking back, I can see the signs were there. Not flashing, not screaming, but soft and quiet, like a door left slightly ajar. But at that point, all I felt was lucky. I had a husband who kissed me goodbye every morning, a best friend who knew all my secrets, and a life that felt full. I had no idea something had already started unraveling beneath the surface. It started small, so small I convinced myself it was nothing. Lara had always been flirty, not in an inappropriate way, at least not overtly, but she had this charm, this energy that drew people in. Daniel found her funny. They teased each other like siblings, and I used to find it endearing. At least I used to. I remember one night, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, we were all watching a movie at our place. I was curled up on the armchair with a blanket, half asleep. Daniel and Lara were on the couch. When the credits rolled, I opened my eyes and saw them laughing at something I'd missed. Her hand was resting on his leg. Not high up, not intimate, but not nothing either. It lingered just a little too long. I blinked, and it was gone. Another time, I walked into the kitchen and found them speaking in hushed voices. When they saw me, they both smiled too quickly, too brightly. Lara said, "We were just trying to remember where we bought that wine you like." But I hadn't mentioned that wine in months. Still, I said nothing. I told myself they were close because we were all close. I wanted to believe that. I needed to. Then came the excuses. Lara used to come over once a week. Friday dinners were our tradition. Suddenly she was busy or tired more often than not. But Daniel started going out more. Work events, he said. I didn't question it, not out loud. There was a shift in Daniel too. He was still kind, still gentle, but there was a distance I couldn't quite name. He stopped asking me how my day was. He forgot our anniversary dinner reservation until the day of. Once, I found one of Lara's hair ties in his car. She must have dropped it last week, he shrugged. I nodded. But it was pink. Lara hadn't worn pink in years. Each of these things alone meant nothing. That's what I kept telling myself. But together they whispered something I didn't want to hear. Still, I stayed silent, because silence felt safer than the truth. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind that drags its feet. I had just come home from work, tired, my head spinning from a long day of parent-teacher meetings. Daniel's phone was buzzing on the kitchen counter. I glanced at it out of habit. It wasn't unusual, he often left it lying around. But that day, I picked it up. We have the same phone model, same black case. I'd meant to check my own, but when I unlocked the screen with my fingerprint, it opened, his, not mine. The message lit up before I even had a chance to put it down. "Miss you already. Last night was everything. Can't wait to feel you again." My stomach dropped. I froze, staring at the words. The contact name just said L. At first, I thought it couldn't be. I thought maybe it was a work colleague, maybe a joke, maybe... But then another message came in. "Next time, let's go somewhere we don't risk getting caught." I scrolled up, hands trembling. The history was there, not just 1 or 2 texts, hundreds, photos, jokes, intimate details, nicknames they had for each other. The way he wrote to her, it wasn't new. It had been going on for months, maybe longer. Then I saw one that ended it all for me. "Tell Anna you're working late again. I'll be waiting." I sat down slowly on the floor, back against the dishwasher. The silence in the house roared in my ears. I couldn't breathe. My best friend, my husband. Every memory of the three of us together came crashing down in a single moment. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, inside jokes. And yet, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, phone in hand, staring at their betrayal as if reading someone else's story. When I finally stood up, I didn't confront him. I didn't call her. I took a screenshot of everything. Then I placed the phone exactly where I found it. Because if they thought I didn't know, then I had time. After that day, I became two people. There was the Anna who still laughed at Daniel's jokes, who texted Lara about book recommendations, who showed up to work like nothing had changed. And then there was the other me, the one who watched every move, remembered every word, and smiled just enough to keep them comfortable. I started collecting. Not just screenshots, but details. I logged dates, times, and places. I paid attention to the days Daniel worked late and cross-referenced them with the nights Lara didn't feel up to talking. I kept a small notebook in my desk drawer, just vague symbols and phrases in case someone found it. But I knew what it all meant. Once Daniel came home late, smelling of Lara's perfume. It was subtle, floral, with a sharp citrus note she'd worn for years. He kissed me on the cheek and said he'd been in back-to-back meetings. I nodded, asked if he wanted dinner, and wrote the time down in my notebook later. Lara, meanwhile, became sweeter. She started texting more, dropping off coffee at my office, saying she missed our Friday nights. It was like she sensed I was slipping away and tried to reel me back in. I played along. I thanked her, smiled, even hugged her tighter than usual. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to relax, because I wasn't ready yet. I couldn't talk to anyone. Not my sister, not my colleagues. No one would understand how I could know and still stay. But I wasn't staying. I was planning. Every day I walked through the house like a ghost, quiet, observant, deliberate. I stopped asking questions. I didn't want lies. I wanted patterns, facts, evidence. I started reading about confrontation psychology. I watched videos on emotional control, body language. I even practiced my smile in the mirror, one that looked warm but held just enough edge. They thought they were fooling me. They thought I was asleep at the wheel, but I was wide awake. And every minute I stayed silent was one more step toward the moment I'd let it all unravel, on my terms. Lara once joked that I was too trusting for my own good. I laughed with her at the time, but now I use that perception like armor. They both kept underestimating me. Daniel grew bolder. He'd leave his phone out more often, as if daring me to check. When I asked about his schedule, he answered with vague kindness, like a man who believed he'd earned my blind faith. Just another late night, he'd say. I'd nod and offer him leftovers from dinner. He never noticed that I stopped saying, "I love you," before bed. Lara began visiting again, dropping by with wine, pretending everything was normal. One evening, she sat across from me in my kitchen, drinking the Pinot Noir she knew I hated, talking about a new guy she was sort of seeing. She described him in abstract terms, just enough detail to keep up the act. I watched her lips move and wondered if she felt even a flicker of guilt, if she knew that I already knew. I tested them sometimes. Subtle things. I asked Daniel about plans Lara had told me she cancelled, and vice versa. Their answers didn't always line up, but they never caught on. They just assumed I was distracted, forgetful, the trusting wife, the naive friend. And maybe that's what made it so easy for them. But what they didn't see were the spreadsheets on my laptop, password protected, with every lie catalogued, the emails I forwarded to myself, the photos I'd taken of the two of them at a distance, laughing too closely outside a cafe they didn't think I knew about. They never once looked at me closely enough to realize I had stopped playing the part they cast me in. I watched them like someone watching a play they'd already seen, knowing every scene, every turn, every line. And the more they thought they had control, the more I quietly took it back. By the time I decided how I'd reveal everything, I already knew one thing for certain. It wouldn't happen in a fight. It wouldn't happen in anger. It would happen in the calmest room, with a table set for 3. It had to look like love. That was the only way it would work. I waited until a quiet Thursday evening. Daniel was reading in the living room. I walked in casually and said, "I was thinking we should catch up with Lara this weekend, just the 3 of us, like old times." He looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Sure, that sounds nice." The trap was set. I texted Lara that same night. "Let's do brunch on Sunday, just us 3, it's been too long." She replied in seconds, "Yes, finally, can't wait." I chose the place carefully. A bright, charming bistro on the east side, one she loved, where the croissants were flaky and the waiters knew us by name. I made a reservation under my name for 11:30, table for 3, near the window. The days leading up to it were slow and calculated. I laid out my clothes the night before. A soft blue dress Daniel once said made me look too put together for a Sunday. I did my nails. I even baked the night before just to keep the illusion alive. On the morning of the brunch, I woke up early and made coffee like always. Daniel came down the stairs yawning, kissed my forehead, and asked if I was excited. I smiled. Very. I arrived first. I always do. I wanted the advantage of being seated, calm, ready. I chose the seat facing the door so I could watch them walk in together. Separately, of course, but not really. They arrived just minutes apart. Lara wore a sundress, hair loose, smile wide. Daniel came in seconds later, his usual relaxed charm in full effect. They both greeted me with hugs, kisses on the cheek, laughter. To anyone watching, we were 3 old friends, catching up over mimosas and eggs Benedict. But only I knew what was coming. As we ordered, talked, laughed, I played my role to perfection. I asked about work, about her new mystery man, about Daniel's new project. And then, halfway through our second round of drinks, I reached for my glass. It was time for a toast. I held the glass steady in my hand. My voice didn't shake. To love, I began, smiling at both of them. They raised their glasses, echoing, to love. To friendship, I added. Lara nodded, her eyes soft. Always, she said. And to honesty, I said, letting that last word sit just a second too long. They clinked glasses. I didn't drink. Instead, I placed mine gently back on the table and looked at them. Really looked. You know, I said, folding my hands in front of me, I've been thinking a lot about how lucky I am to have a husband who's been by my side for over a decade and a best friend who's known me since we were kids. That kind of loyalty. It's rare. They both smiled, though Daniel shifted ever so slightly. I continued, my voice still calm. That's why it hurt so much when I found out you were sleeping together. Silence. Lara's smile cracked first. Daniel blinked, like he'd misheard me. Neither said a word. I wasn't sure at first, I said, taking out my phone, but the messages helped, and the photos, and your little meeting spot by Riverbend Cafe. Very cute, by the way. Lara's face turned pale. Daniel's lips parted like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. I thought about screaming, I said. About throwing this glass, about crying. But then I realized something. I paused. You gave me a gift. They just stared. You freed me. From lies. From pretending. From 2 people who clearly thought I was too stupid to notice. I looked at Lara. I hope he's worth it. Then I turned to Daniel. And I hope she stays loyal longer than you did. I stood, calmly picked up my purse, and placed a $20 bill on the table. No need to split the check, I said softly. You 2 can handle it. And then I walked out, heels clicking on the tile, not once looking back. Outside, the sun was too bright. The air felt lighter than it had in weeks. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there for a moment with the windows down, just breathing. Inside that bistro, they were probably still frozen, trying to process what had just happened. But I was done thinking about their reactions. That part of the story belonged to them now. I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly for a while, through quiet neighborhoods, past the bookstore Lara and I used to go to, past the corner where Daniel had proposed. These places should have hurt, but all I felt was distance, like I was watching someone else's memories fade into the rearview mirror. Later that day, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to see the messages I knew were coming. I didn't want their apologies, their explanations, their excuses. I needed silence, and silence was what I got. It took Daniel 3 hours to come home. He didn't speak at first, just stood in the doorway staring at me like he didn't recognize who I was. I looked back at him and said nothing. You knew? He asked finally. I've known, I said. He sat on the edge of the couch, head in his hands. I didn't move to comfort him. I didn't move at all. Lara didn't come by. But she sent an email the next morning. Long, emotional, full of half-justifications and phrases like, I never meant to hurt you and I didn't know how to stop. I didn't reply. I archived it without reading past the first paragraph. The silence stretched over the next few days. No fights. No yelling. Just 2 people moving through the same house like strangers. I started packing boxes Books, clothes, kitchen stuff. My name was on the lease, but I didn't want to stay. The walls knew too much. I didn't owe either of them closure. That toast had said everything I needed to say, and now it was time to disappear from their story entirely. I moved out on a Tuesday. No dramatic goodbyes, no announcements. I loaded my car with the last box, closed the door behind me, and left the key in the mailbox. Daniel wasn't home. I didn't tell him where I was going. I didn't owe him that anymore. I stayed with my sister for a few weeks. Her guest room had floral sheets and a crooked lamp, but it felt like a sanctuary. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't have to. She just listened when I was ready, poured wine when I needed it, and reminded me who I was when I started to forget. Friends reached out, slowly at first, then more steadily. Word had gotten around. Some said they were shocked. Others confessed they'd always sensed something off. A few people quietly unfriended Lara online. I didn't ask for any of it, but I felt the support in subtle ways. Messages, invitations, the space to grieve without being pushed to explain. I started therapy. I journaled. I joined a yoga class on Thursday mornings where no one knew me as Daniel's wife or Lara's best friend, just Anna. At school, I threw myself into work. My students became a comfort, chaotic and loud, yes, but also honest in a way adults often forget how to be. One of them left a note on my desk that said, "You look really strong lately." They had no idea what I was carrying. I changed my number. Blocked Lara and Daniel on everything. Not out of spite, but because I needed peace. Real, uninterrupted peace. Sometimes I still replay that brunch in my mind. The stunned silence, the way Lara's hand slowly dropped from her glass, the way Daniel couldn't look me in the eye. Not because I regret it, but because it reminds me I chose myself. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ending the performance. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I left with the truth, and with every piece of my dignity intact. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. Some people imagine revenge as fire, loud, destructive, full of fury. But mine was quiet. It was the click of a door closing behind me, the sound of my own breath, steady and calm, the stillness of being alone without being lonely. Months have passed since that brunch. I live in a smaller apartment now. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I painted the walls a pale green, filled the shelves with books I love, and started every morning with sunlight pouring through the windows. Peace lives here, and for once it's not pretending. I don't think about Daniel the way I used to. He's no longer the center of my grief. He's just part of the past, a chapter that ended. I don't wonder what he's doing, or if he misses me, that silence we once shared in the house. I've turned it into something beautiful. As for Lara, I haven't spoken to her since her email. I see her sometimes online through mutual connections. I scroll past. I don't need her apologies. I don't need her guilt. I know who she is now. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing how much of myself I gave away in the name of loyalty to people who didn't deserve it. But that realization gave me something unexpected, a return to myself. I've reconnected with old friends. I've traveled alone for the first time. I've stood in bookstores and museums without worrying about someone else's schedule. And every time I choose myself, it feels like a small, quiet kind of justice. I used to think walking away meant failure, that holding on was strength. Now I know the truth. Strength is leaving with your head high, your heart open, and your story intact. So no, I didn't ruin their lives. I didn't scream in public or shatter plates. I toasted them. I exposed them, and I walked away. And that, I've learned, is the kind of revenge they never see coming. The kind they'll feel every time they sit across from each other and remember how I left, with grace, free.